this book is, in a weird way, it's attacking two worldviews. The, let's say, right wing of the tyrannical, and then the left wing of the humanist. Maybe you've grown up on the movies, Charlton Heston, Prince of Egypt. You want to throw those out. You want to reconstruct the passage as you read it. Like the iconography of the movies, keep it, sure. But the actual events, the actual characters, they're different in this book. You want to have a close look as you're reading the text. The first half attacks the tyranny of Pharaoh. The second half attacks the tyranny and complacency of Israel. First question, is Moses a terrorist? That's the wrong question. The real question is Moses an extremist? To answer that question, you need to know if he is, or if God is asserting his authority properly to what Pharaoh is asserting. What did Pharaoh do before the 10 plagues for God to attack him the way he did? Was it proper force? And keep in mind, the killing of the firstborn doesn't happen until the end, despite the fact that 40 years earlier, Pharaoh threw not the firstborn, but every male at one point. Another question, does God violate free will by hardening Pharaoh's heart? Well, that depends. When God helps harden Pharaoh's heart, does he do that the whole time? And didn't Pharaoh start the hardening himself at the beginning? Now, it should be pretty clear God values free will, because otherwise, why would he free the Israelites? Why not just trade them from one tyrant to another? Or better yet, just call Pharaoh. Well, he didn't call Pharaoh. He called Moses to free Israel. So God definitely values free will and does not care too much for slavery. And as you go through the law codes, you'll see more of that slavery is an inescapable institution because it's supposed to take away people's debts. It's supposed to help the poor where they're at. There are no banks. There are no police. And if you say, well, you're kind of conflating having debt with slavery, well, you need to realize people who talk about biblical slavery today are often conflating American slavery and Bronze Age slavery, which, yeah, there was exploitation in both, but they're just completely different. One was based on race, the other was based on debt and the lack of a police force. Like, this is not the same thing. And you need to realize this version of slavery presented in the law code is far more progressive than what Pharaoh has instilled. Because the year of Jubilee means there's a limit of 7 years. And there is one law code that prohibits kidnapping. You'll find it if you're closely reading. So, and this is why you can't trust critics when they talk about slavery, because they never bring up that verse that prohibits kidnapping on the punishment of death. It should be pretty clear that if they don't bring that verse up, they didn't read the text, right? If you're gonna be a Bible critic, you gotta read the Bible, dude. So, no. This version of slavery, not chattel slavery, not even close. And when people in the Bible do exploit it later on, they're not doing it within God's sovereignty. They're not doing it as God ordained. It's just not the same. Further evidence of God's devaluing of slavery is in the New Testament when it's used as a metaphor for sin. Like, if you're a slave to your sin, and sin is bad, obviously, slavery is not good, unless you're enslaved to the source of goodness. Which, like, if I say I'm a slave of righteousness, that means, that's a good connotation, right? That's a passionate connotation. Now, what about more of the law code and how strange it is to our modern context? Well, again, there's no police, so people have to punish on their own accord, sometimes going to judicial officials. And when God directly punishes people himself, it's only rare. It's only once in a while, as if to say, okay, you guys don't understand that I'm being merciful, so I'm going to kill this set of people, execute this set of people to make an example out of them. That's called an object lesson. Because otherwise, God wants to be merciful. But in order to establish what mercy is, you have to first establish what justice is. Now, this goes against a lot of different groups. The humanists, we'll call them, which is made up of secular atheists, progressive Christians, and just anybody who assumes that human beings are better off with less institutions instead of more, presuming ontological moral innocence. This is where the divide comes. This is an attack on those groups in the second half. Believing human beings are better off with less institutions instead of more is completely contradictory to the beginning of Genesis, when Adam and Eve strayed away from God and did what they wanted with the tree of knowledge. So God in Exodus is trying to prevent that. And he's set up these precedents, which we're not totally sure if they were educated on or not, but that precedent existed in some form. With those precedents set up, he is leading them theocratically through Moses to be better morally, more educated, more prepared. Because lawfully, yes, the law is on their heart, but they've kind of been cut off from it. They've been in the Egyptian world for a long time. Probably most of the book right there. But there's a huge third of it just dedicated to probably the most detailed description of a Bronze Age construction project. And that is the Ark of the Covenant, which holds God's presence, and the tabernacle, which is the surrounding space outside the Ark of the Covenant, which is supposed to be analogous to both Sinai and the temple, because that's where God's presence was. And Moses wants the people, through the priests, to be able to be self-sustained as they approach God, to approach him the same way he has been able to throughout the entire book. But then the twist comes at the end. Moses is not able to enter the presence of God any longer. And the question we get to ask ourselves is why? Why was Moses put outside of God's presence at the end of the book? Enjoy this while you have it. It's going to be your friend for a lifetime. One more note about Egypt. This is the crown jewel of the ancient world. And it says a lot about God when he says, nope, I'm going to free people. I'm going to lead them to freedom. Something that distinguishes the pre-axial age from the axial age is that the axial age was the first real enlightenment. That's when philosophy became about not just learning wisdom, not just learning how to manipulate people or learning metaphysics, but it became about actually having integrity. And through God working through the Exodus, this is the first instance where we're leaving that pre-axial line of thinking and we're going into the new way of thinking, which is focused on having integrity.